War has changed. It's no longer about nations, ideologies, or ethnicity. It's an endless series of proxy battles fought by mercenaries and machines.
In 1998, while the rest of us were arguing about whether it would be dial-up internet or Y2K which would completely delete our civilization as we knew it, one man named Hideo Kojima looked into the digital abyss, and he saw the future. He was a man who wasn't afraid to ask strange questions. What if war never ends because it's profitable? What if the truth was being actively curated? And what if you were never born to live, but to die fighting? Hideo Kojima, he wasn't just making a game. He was making a statement, like a modern-day Shakespeare. Only if Shakespeare had a mild obsession with camouflage, guns, and nanomachines. Nowadays, we talk about game directors in the same way that we talk about film directors. But that wasn't terribly common in 1998. All of that changed because one man decided that a tactical espionage game should also be an existential lecture about humanity. That's the story of Metal Gear Solid. It's a stealth game, a philosophical essay, and a tragedy about men who were specifically engineered to be weapons and then spent their entire lives trying not to be. So today, we're going to talk about why Metal Gear Solid and the entire franchise was so influential. Back in the late 90s, most games were about jumping, shooting, and collecting shiny objects. The plot, well, that was optional. Voice acting? That's risky. And emotional nuance? Well, that was for losers. But Metal Gear Solid was different. It featured fully voiced cutscenes, cinematic camera angles, and a soundtrack that made every air vent and hallway feel like the climax of a Cold War documentary. It wasn't just a game that you played. It was a game that you watched. It was a game that you thought about even after you turned it off. But here's the most radical thing. The Metal Gear Solid franchise assumed that you were intelligent. It didn't spoon-feed players everything. It let the conversations linger. It layered political theory inside of codec calls that lasted longer than some of your relationships. But this completely changed boardroom conversations about what video games could be. And they probably could have had some of those conversations during one of those unskippable 45-minute monologues about nuclear ethics that we've all come to love. At the heart of all of it is Solid Snake. A legendary soldier, a ghost on the battlefield, a man whose resume includes stopped nuclear apocalypse multiple times. But here's the twist. He doesn't like war one bit. Snake isn't patriotic in the chest-thumping sense. He doesn't romanticize combat, and he never seeks glory. Every mission he takes feels like an obligation, like he's cleaning up someone else's mess. And the reason is tragic, because he was bred for this. Solid Snake is a clone. He was engineered from the genes of the greatest soldier who ever lived. He was created as part of a government project to replicate battlefield perfection. Imagine being born and growing to adulthood and then discovering your entire existence is just a military photocopy. He saves the world not because he believes in the system, but because he believes that people deserve to live outside of it. He wasn't a walking tank. He was just a man who happened to be fighting literal walking tanks. But Solid Snake, he's not just a character. He's an idea. He's a soldier who's questioning orders. He's a weapon that questions war. And somehow, that worked. It worked because you weren't encouraged to fight. You were encouraged to avoid fighting, to hide, to observe patrol routes, and to knock on walls like a polite ghost. Stealth became the main mechanic, and patience became power. This design philosophy influenced entire franchises that came after it. Splinter Cell, Hitman, even Assassin's Creed. Well, that started creeping into game design because a Japanese man's snowy Alaskan fever dream. But to understand Snake, you have to understand the man he was cloned from. Big Boss. Big Boss, he began as an idealist, a loyal soldier, a man who believed in camaraderie and the mission above all else. In Metal Gear Solid 3, we see his origin. We watched him be manipulated by governments all across the globe. He was used as a pawn. He was forced to kill the mentor that he loved, simply for political convenience. In that game, he learned something devastating, that soldiers are disposable, that nations, they don't care about the warriors that they send. They care about outcomes. And so, Big Boss makes a choice. If the world will use soldiers as tools, he'll use his tools to create a world for soldiers. He'll create a nation without borders, a place where warriors can choose their battles and where loyalty isn't dictated by politicians in quiet rooms. It's a beautiful idea, but it was also doomed from the start. Because in trying to protect soldiers from exploitation, Big Boss became something terrifying. He became a man willing to perpetuate conflict so that his world can survive. He doesn't want war. but he also believes that it's inevitable. That tragedy, in believing that you must sustain the very thing that you hate, is the essence of Metal Gear. The clone project that created Solid Snake, it was never about heroism. It was about control. And governments looked at Big Boss and thought, let's mass produce that. That's not just science fiction. It's a metaphor for child soldiers, for generational trauma incurred during war, and for systems that train people for violence and then act surprised when violence continues. Snake knows that he was engineered for combat superiority. He has faster reflexes and sharper instincts, but he also knows something else. He'll always have free will. One of the most powerful themes in the series is this conflict between genes and choice. Are you your DNA? Are you your upbringing? Or are you the decisions you make when nobody is watching? Snake constantly rejects the idea that he's just Big Boss 2.0, and in doing so, he becomes something greater. He's a soldier who fights so that others will never have to. Unfortunately, his brother, Liquid Snake, fell victim to this ideology, that if soldiers fight, they deserve to rule over the rubble that's left, and those that die, they were never deserving in the first place. But here's where things get spooky. Metal Gear Solid wasn't just about walking nuclear mechs and soldiers with unexplained powers. It was always about control, of information, of genes, and of perception. It talked about proxy battles, nuclear deterrence, AI oversight, digital censorship, and the manipulation of the truth. Long before social media algorithms were deciding what you see, long before deepfakes and AI, long before we all became unpaid interns for our own personal data collection, these games asked, what happens if information becomes the ultimate weapon? Today, we just call that Tuesday. This happens most in Metal Gear Solid 2, where the focus is on cultural DNA, ideas that spread, beliefs that replicate, and information that shapes humanity more than biology ever could. And then it did something unhinged. It predicted AI-curated information, digital echo chambers, the erosion of objective truth, and the idea that people will accept comfortable lies over uncomfortable facts. Then, in 2001, before mega data centers, there were the Patriots, an AI system controlling global information flow, and it felt like sci-fi at the time. Now, it feels like a documentary. Here's another eerie prediction: endless war as an economy. Later entries like Metal Gear Solid 4 explored private military companies, wars as a business, and soldiers as simply commodities. Sound familiar? In a world increasingly shaped by defense contracts, privatized conflict, and drone warfare, the franchise felt less like fiction and more like speculative journalism. It wasn't glorifying war, it was simply dissecting it. And sometimes, yes, it made you fight as a cyborg ninja while questioning capitalism. But it's called multitasking, sweetie. Replaying Metal Gear Solid now, it's surreal. There's polygonal faces, crunchy footsteps, and low-resolution snow. But the themes? They're sharper than ever. It didn't just predict the future, it warned us about it, but we were too busy hiding in lockers to notice. In the end, Metal Gear Solid wasn't just influential because it pioneered cinematic storytelling or predicted AI-controlled information networks. It mattered because it asked whether or not soldiers can escape the battlefield even if they were born there. It asked whether or not peace is even possible in a world that profits off of war, and it dared to suggest that even a man engineered for combat could lay down his weapon, even if he had to hide in a cardboard box to do so. Thank you for making it to the end of this video. Tell me, what's your favorite title in the Metal Gear Solid franchise? Or, if you have any ideas for videos that you want to see in the future, drop them down below. We may just talk about it. Peace.
War.